In today's episode, we're building our weapon inventory system. By the end of the video, you'll carry multiple weapons, switch between them with number keys, and each weapon's going to maintain its own ammo count and unlock status. To do that, we're going to create a couple of different things. First, a larger manager's system, and then a part of that is our weapon manager, and that's going to handle all of the weapon unlocking, the slots, and control the weapon switching. Before we jump into the manager part, we actually need to create something called a weapon data resource, and it's going to act like an instance of our weapon. Let's create that resource, and then we can talk exactly what's in it. I'm going to go into my assets, weapons, scripts folder, and we're going to create a new script. We'll call this weapon data, open that up, and it's actually very small. So we have a class name, it's going to extend a resource, and it's going to hold 3 different pieces of information for now. The first is what weapon does this weapon data represent? That could be our pistol, it could be our shotgun, whether or not it's unlocked. So, if you haven't gotten the weapon in the game yet, then it's locked, and going to that slot's not going to do anything. Now, typically the pistol would be just unlocked at the beginning of the game, so that would be set to true. And then when you first pick up a weapon, we set that to true so you can switch to it. And then finally, we need to track what the current ammo for that weapon is. Because we're going to be switching between different weapons, and we need to keep track of that ammo for each specific weapon. Now that we have the blueprint for that resource, let's create a pistol data resource. Let's go to our resources folder, and we'll create a new resource. And we should have our weapon data resource right there. Open that up. Let's call this pistol data. And if you double click that, you'll notice we have our 3 export variables in the inspector. So because this is the pistol, we want to set this to our pistol weapon. It's going to be unlocked by default. And let's say you wanted to have starting ammo. Let's set that to 20. So whenever we start the game, our pistol is going to have 20 ammo right at the beginning. Now we haven't actually created our other weapon resources. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll create a new weapon and we'll call this our shotgun. Double click that and let's adjust some of these things. So if you've been following the tutorial series, you can go look through the last few videos and this is all going to be in there. It's a hit scan, pellet count. We can do 8. Spread angle 0.1. We don't have any new weapon models, so we'll just load our pistol setup and that should be good. That's our shotgun. So then let's make our shotgun weapon data. Call that shotgun data. Open that up. And now because we have our weapon, we can pick shotgun and we'll just have this unlocked so we can test it. When we go into pickups, then we can have it so a weapon can be unlocked. For now, we'll just have it be unlocked. And then ammo, let's say 12. And that's good for now. You can always add more if you want to. Now we need a way to manage these things. And before we jump into a weapon manager, we need a manager to manage the managers. The idea is we create a single autoload. That's a manager's autoload. And then we get a reference to all of our managers within that manager autoload, which means we can access any manager anywhere. Once we get the manager's autoload set up, it's going to make some more sense. Let's go to project settings, go to globals, and then we have autoload. Let's put this in our systems folder. So we'll call this managers, and we're going to add it to our assets, scripts, system. I like to put all the managers within that. Open that, create, and we have our manager's autoload. Make sure that your global variable is checked, and then we'll open that up. This is not a complicated script at all. It's just a way to manage any managers that we create. So I'm going to paste what I have in here. Now we don't have our weapon manager yet, but how this is going to work is we're going to have a variable for any manager that we create. This could be our game manager, which we do have. It could be a weapon manager, it could be a sound manager, just anything that's going to orchestrate these higher level parts of your game. Now the idea is that whenever we add a manager into our main scene, so everything can have access to it, we're going to put that manager in its own group. For our weapon manager, we're going to put that into the weapon manager group. Groups are a really useful tool within the Godot engine. Then when we ready our autoload, we need to do a call deferred. So wait till everything has loaded, and then we'll do our find managers. And once that process runs, It means that we can type in managers and then weapon manager and access anything that we want. Let's save that, and then let's create our weapon manager so this isn't screaming at us. We'll go back into assets and then scripts and then system, and let's create a new script. This is going to be called our weapon manager. Save that, open that up, and let's just get it operating here because there's going to be a lot of stuff that we put in here. Let's make sure we have our class name, weapon manager, extending node, and let's go back and check our manager script. Should be happy. There we go. And back to our weapon manager. So within an FPS, you're going to have different weapons, and these different weapons are typically treated as a slot. Our slots are going to be held within our weapons dictionary. So for each weapon, we're going to have an integer. That's the slot number, and then our weapon data that we just created. So for example, say slot 1, that's our number 1 on our keyboard, that's going to be the pistol weapon. And because we have this in our export here, we can actually do this by hand. And we can do that by going to our main scene, creating a new node. We'll call that weapon manager, and then attach our weapon manager script. And we can kind of, unfortunately, look at the ugly dictionary setup that Godot has, but you got to make do. So we have a new key. We'll add a new weapon data. That's going to be our pistol. And that represents our first weapon slot. And then we can add a new pair, add our shotgun data, and that would be our second weapon slot. And that's just how you manage your weapon slots. You just have them listed out and you set them to the different weapon data. And we'll go back and make sure those are correct in a little bit, but we'll close that for now. We also have a player reference. And because our player is external of our level, remember we set that up. We'll also select a reference for that. And then let's go back to the weapon manager script. So the first thing we're going to do is within our ready function, we're going to add it like we talked about to our group. And then that adds it to the weapon manager. You don't even have to manually create these groups. It does it right away if it's not already there. So the whole purpose of the weapon manager is to manage the switching of the weapons and to update aspects of the weapon data resource. So after we add it to our weapon manager group, we're going to manually create our input mapping. Now you can do this by hand. You go to project settings, input map, and you can do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can also just do it in script. So for eye and range, this is weapons 1 through 10. We're setting a new action name. So this would be, for the first one, weapon 1, weapon 2. And if we don't already have that action, we're going to add an action using that action name. And like when if you do it manually, you also have to set the events. So we do that with input event key new, and that's going to be our key code. So key 1, and this just assigns it to the number keys. And then we add that event to the action that we already set. Now we need to actually check for it. And we'll do that with an unhandled input function. Unhandled input, again, that means just something that hasn't already been taken up by we'll check our range again between 1 and 10. And then we check if one of the actions we just created here is pressed. And if it is, we're going to switch to that slot. Now we don't have that function yet. That's actually the next thing we're going to do. So let's go down here and I'm going to paste that function in. We've created our mapping. We're checking if we're going to press one of those keys here, and then we're passing along which key we pressed. And we're passing that in as a slot. So if we were selecting 2, then we're going to switch to slot 2. We get the weapon data from our weapons dictionary. So remember we added some dummy content here. So if we press that first slot and we go to the pistol, we're just getting the corresponding dictionary entry according to whatever slot we're switching to. We get that weapon data, we can check if that weapon data is unlocked. Again, that's our setting over here. And if it is, then we're going to set the current slot to that slot. Within our player, our weapon controller, we're going to switch weapon. Now we don't have that yet, but we're going to be adding it very soon. And all of that handles switching between our different weapons. We have 2 more small helper functions that we need to add, and that's to manage our ammo. Now remember, we have to keep track of what our ammo is for each of these weapons. We can't just have a generic, ammo, which I think is what we currently have within our weapon controller, right? We have current ammo up here. We can't just have a generic one and then switch between that because it's not going to keep track of what we already have. So if you shoot a pistol, you had 8 ammo, you shoot twice, you have 6, you switch to a different weapon, you're going to lose that 6. It's not going to remember that. That's why within our weapon data, we're keeping track of that ammo. And when we get to our saving and loading system, this is one of the things that we're going to be saving. So we're going to alter a little bit how we are handling our ammo. And we're going to do that with 2 functions within our weapon manager. Use ammo, and we're going to pass along our slot and the amount of ammo that we're using, which by default is going to be 1. And then whenever we use ammo, we're going to check if that slot is in our weapons. And then getting that slot reference within our weapons dictionary, we're going to set our ammo amount to a max between 0 and whatever ammo we already had minus the amount. So let's say we had, as we currently do, we have 20 in our pistol. We shoot, we use an ammo, it subtracts, it's now 19. And then that 19 is going to be referenced when we shoot again. And that's going to happen until you get to 0. So all that is we're taking the ammo, which was a generic current ammo, and we're putting it individually within our dictionary for each weapon. And since we're using this weapons dictionary to track our ammo, we also need a way to get that ammo. We just get a easy helper function, get current ammo. We're going to pass along that integer, and we're going to return whatever that value is depending upon our current slot. Let's make sure we have our weapon manager in our main scene, which we do. Make sure you have a reference to the player, and make sure you've added your weapon data into your weapons dictionary. And I will note here, actually, you want to make sure that these are matching your slot numbers. And it typically starts with 0, but it's actually going to be 1. So let's cancel those out, and this will be 1 for our very first one. We'll add that, and then 2 for our shotgun. So make sure you start with number 1. Now, while we're talking about groups, let's make a small change to our player controller. A lot of the time, you're going to want to get a reference to the player controller in some way, and it can be very helpful to just put it in its own group. And then you can look for that group, and because it's the only node, it's pretty easy to find. Let's do that manually. So if you don't know how to do that, you go into the root, go to the node that you want to reference here, and then go to the node tab right up there. You're probably used to seeing the signals. You also have a groups button. So you'll see scene groups and global groups. You want to make this a global group. So we're going to put the player in the player group, make it global, add it, and now you can just look for the player group, and you get a reference to the player controller. You can do that by just this line, get first node and group within the player. Let's get rid of that. So we have a player group for the player, and let's go to the player controller. We need to add a reference to the weapon controller that we have. And remember, we have this export category for our references. You can go down wherever you want to within here. I'm going to put it right underneath our camera effects, and we'll add another export for weapon controller, because remember, we are going to reference the weapon controller in our script. Make sure you assign it, save that, and then let's make some adjustments to our weapon controller. Now in the weapon manager, remember we had the switch weapon function. We don't actually have that, so we need to create it. We're going to go into our weapon controller, just head to the very bottom, and we're going to add this function right here, switch weapon, and we need a parameter for our weapon data. I'm going to go back to the weapon manager. Remember, we're passing the weapon data, and just to refresh our memories, the weapon data has whatever weapon it represents, whether it's unlocked, and its current ammo. So whenever we are switching, we're getting that weapon data, and we set our current weapon to the weapon in that weapon data. The way we currently do that is we are setting that current weapon in our inspector. So now we're going to be setting it using our weapon data and our switching logic that's in our weapon manager. Then we check if we have a weapon model. If we do, we want to get rid of that. And then we're just going to run the spawn weapon model that we already have. Just as a refresher, that's up here from a previous video. That's just what adds the gun to the player controller. Again, this was already happening. We just were manually setting the weapon and then having it load at ready. Now we can manually call that because of our weapon manager. So what we should be able to do is press 1 or 2 on the keyboard, and it's going to switch between our pistol and our shotgun. And I've added a print here so we can get the current weapon, and this is a reference to our weapon resource, and this has all of that information. So we're going to get the weapon name and we're going to print that. So I'm going to press play and I'm going to press 1 and you'll see pistol show up, and I'll press 2 and you'll see shotgun. And in fact, you'll see the weapon model is in a different position because we have different position settings. And you can switch back between those just like that. And our pistol works and our shotgun works too. Now we need to account for that ammo difference that we had. So let's go to our weapon controller again, and let's go to the can fire function. Currently, we are checking our current ammo, and this current ammo is living within our weapon controller. We're not going to use that anymore. We're going to use the current ammo within the weapon data instead. And we can do that with this line right here. Actually, that's not, it's a long line. Let's make that a little bit there. That's better. So we're getting our weapon data, and that is coming from our weapon manager. So we're getting that weapons dictionary that we talked about, and then we're getting the current slot that we have set in that manager. So weapons dictionary, current slot. I'll go back so you can see what that looks like again. Weapon manager in our main scene, weapons dictionary, current slot. 1 or 2. So we're getting that information. And then this is basically the same, except instead of current ammo, we need to get the ammo within the weapon data. So weapon data, ammo, if it's greater than 0, and we can fire next. And that's going to tell us whether or not we can fire. Now we go to the fire weapon function, and we need to adjust this right here. We're using the ammo within our weapon data. Let's change it so it reflects that. So instead of that line, we're going to run that use ammo function that we created in the weapon manager. So go back to that, use ammo, the slot, the amount, and then we're subtracting again from the weapon data. So if we can fire, we're going to use our ammo, subtract 1 from the current slot of our weapon. Let's check that. So we have our pistol, fired pistol, ammo 19, fired pistol, ammo 18. We can go down all the way to 0, and then we can't shoot anymore. So that should completely transfer the responsibility for the ammo to the weapon manager. We have a couple of variable cleanups to do. Let's go to weapon controller, and remember we're not using current ammo anymore. So we can get rid of that, can comment or delete that line, because we're setting the max ammo within the weapon data, and the current weapon doesn't need to be an export variable anymore. If you want to still be able to set it in the inspector, so whenever you start the game, it's whatever gun you set, you can keep it. But because we're setting that within our weapon manager, it can just be a regular variable because it gets set. The alternative to that is we can just move that logic to our weapon manager. So let's go to our weapon manager, and we're going to add a new function. And this is going to be initialize starting weapon. And the way I've set this up is we're just going to check what our first weapon is. It should always be your first weapon, your pistol, or a melee weapon if that's how you set it. We're just checking the range again, and for whatever weapon exists for the first slot and it's unlocked, we're going to switch to that slot and we're going to get out of this or return. So we've added that. Let's go up to our ready, and then at the very end of our ready function, let's run that function. So we're going to initialize our starting weapon. We're going to do a call deferred just to make sure our player is loaded and it's ready to accept that, and then we're going to run that function, initialize starting weapon. That should set the pistol as your first weapon. Let's go ahead and test this. And I accidentally have an error. So I forgot I had one more reference to that current ammo in our weapon state. So I'm in the idle weapon state, and within that state, we're checking if our ammo is less than or equal to 0. So we need to fix that. Let's add another function. Let's go to the weapon controller, and at the bottom, let's do a helper function here that's going to check if we have any ammo. Let's make this a Boolean. So we're going to check our weapon data and then go into our managers. In fact, this is a good example of why our managers is so useful. Do managers, do our weapon manager, go into our weapons dictionary, and current slot, and then let's return weapon data ammo if greater than 0. So we're going to go reference then our weapon data and our ammo value within that. If it's greater than 0, then we have ammo, and if it's If it's not, then we don't. That means we can use this function elsewhere if we ever need to. So let's go do that and then go back to our idle state. So instead of weapon controller current ammo, we can do if not weapon controller has ammo, and that should do it. Let's test that. Good. All right, we have our pistol, and we've got another arrow because we're using that again. Sorry, I didn't check that out. But this is fine because we can just use the same thing we just did. We'll just check if we don't have ammo. We'll just do the same thing. That's why that function was helpful. So let's test it again, see if we get another one. Nope, we're good. All right, so we're firing, going down to 0, weapon empty. Perfect. In fact, now that I'm thinking about this, we also are going to have an issue that we're even going to the empty state, because we'll go to the empty state and we'll get stuck there. So we need to adjust our state when we switch our weapons. So how can we do that? Let's go to the weapon controller. I think, yeah, let's do it when we switch weapon. So whenever we switch our weapon, let's reset our weapon state to idle. Should be able to do that right here. Okay, so we'll go to our weapon state chart, and after we switch our weapon, we're going to send an event, and that event will go back to idle. Save that. Let's adjust our pistol so it fires a little faster. All right, so let's test this. We'll shoot our pistol till we run out of ammo, and we are in the empty state, and switch to shotgun, back in the idle state. And now we can shoot. And there we go. So you should now have the ability to create weapon slots, assign weapons to those slots, and remember and control the ammo for each of those weapons. We also have a manager setup for future things, which we're definitely going to need as we get into enemies and health and all that jazz. As always, the project source files are available on my Patreon. Thanks to everyone who is currently supporting me. It means so much, makes it possible to make these videos. We're going to be getting into enemies very, very soon, and at that point, we're going to have a game loop, and that's going to be a lot of fun. So, as always, thanks for watching, and keep creating.